Okay, so one of the things you'll need to do is to get that rod antenna loose. Where the antenna actually makes electrical connection is right here. Be a little bit gentle with this. This is kind of a phenolic or Bakelite type connector plate, and that just comes up. Some of them have a wire, and I strongly suggest that you take this antenna loose. There's a little clamp down here, and I think that's a 1/4 inch. Yeah. You just remove these 2 little screws. Now's a good time for your little plastic baggie to kick into gear. You can use, I don't know, you can use whatever you want. Everybody has their own ideas. And if I remember, this there's a little annoyance that happened. Basically what's happened is the nuts got stuck, so what you do is you screw it back on a tiny bit and pull it off, and then it comes on loose or unstuck. Okay, so we'll put these little keeper nuts away. And if you take and kind of rattle this around, it comes loose. Now, somebody's been in on this one, so there's also a little tiny washer in there that's on here, but we apparently only have one. That's okay. So now you've made your life a lot easier. You can do a couple things now. This basically is just a little clamp. Well, how about we do this? That's one of the other disadvantages, or one of the other, I don't know, I guess it's a sort of a hurdle to overcome when you make these videos, is you're basically, you know, you're it. That's all there is to it, unless you have a whole team of production people. So you got to be the post-production people, and it's kind of interesting. You're doing, if you stop and think about it, you're doing a number of jobs all at once. You're trying to follow your script if you wrote one. Haha. It's pretty interesting, actually. So the next time you watch somebody's video, you might sit down and think about that. Those things are pretty interesting. There are, you know, hundreds of thousands, probably more even that. There are, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of video on YouTube and its you know, other channels, and it's kind of interesting. You can pop this clamp if you run a knife in there and just go along the edge, and it'll just slowly open up. And on this model, there are 2 little rubber rings there. And you can put that away. You set that off the side. I usually roll the wire up. This one actually has a braid that's been soldered on there. Now's a good time. This is when you're working on the radio anyway. This is one of those little side trips. Here's how that antenna works again. There's the gap, and this just swings around. When it does, it pops up. You may want to expand all this and clean it real good. Maybe give it a light coat of some kind of lubricant, or maybe not. Everybody has their own choices or ways they deal with their radios. It's what makes the world interesting. There's always more than one way to skin a cat, or work on a radio in this case. Okie dokie. So we're getting a little closer. What we should do before we go any further is close that up, spin this around, and we need, on this particular unit, we need to take these two knobs and this jack loose. And the jack has a little screw, or excuse me, a little washer also. That goes in the bag. Another good way to keep track of parts is to use, you can use like Tupperware, disposable Tupperware or plastic boxes, and then when you've got everything in there you can just snap the lid shut and write on them. When it comes time to take these knobs off, some of these have been on there since the day this thing was born, which was probably, I don't know, in the 50s. What is that, about, what, 50 or 60 years? So, yeah, getting up there. So you need to get these knobs off. Be a little careful. Some of these can really be on there. Usually what I do is, I usually use my fingers to kind of squeeze on there and kind of pull and kind of cam that up at the same time. It's kind of hard to, it's sort of a pinching kind of pulling action. If you just grab the thing and yank on it, there's a possibility you could break something. So you just slowly do that, and there, and they usually just pop off. Keep in mind too that when you do this on this radio, isn't probably going to be too complicated to do this, but there are some knobs that belong in specific places. Like this one has a little flag, and you're gonna, that one just slid off, so that one's a little bit of a bear. It appears there's nothing else that holds the thing in. Another little side trip, if you decide to take this case apart a little bit more, there are a number of little screws around the perimeter here that hold this face on. So we'll close this back up. FYI, on some of the other Zeniths, some of them have the wave magnet in the lid up here. Okay, how does that work? This lid closes. Well, there's actually an electrical connection that goes over to here and into this hinge, and then the hinge has a wire that goes down and hooks up. So that can be a little interesting, so kind of keep an eye on those hinges. Like this one is loose. Actually on this side, it's actually loose. Oh, let me zoom in here. There's a lot of zooming and editing and things. Now if this were one of the other Zeniths, that could potentially be an electrical problem and cause you some grief. Okay, so we'll spin this baby back around and zoom out. And okie dokie. So one of the other little things you're going to need to do is get this chassis loose. Normally, and here's one of my favorite things, if you can hear this or not. I'm kind of in the flight line for every helicopter in town. Man, that's baby so big. Thing at? So every time a helicopter comes by, I've got to stop and start over. Okay, under this one there actually are two sheet metal screws that go through this little shelf. There's a wood shelf here and up into the chassis. Remember those holes I showed you earlier? They're intended for nut drivers to go through. the nut driver would come up through here and hook into the radio screw. And I, for the life of me, can't remember. Is that 5/16? If you had a normal nut driver. These are real stubby ones, so they work just as well. So there's one screw, and there's a star washer under there. One of the other things that's fun about working with yourself when you're making a video is you can't see when you're in the way of the camera. And I gave up. I dropped that screw and it disappeared. It went right through the hole. Okay. Now, originally when I took this particular Zenith loose, or attempted to, it did not want to come out. And anytime there's any resistance to disassembling something, I usually stop and take a look. And if you've got kind of brute force mitts or gorilla hands, or you've got the mind of a gorilla, if you're that lucky, usually something bad can happen. So usually what I do, originally when I tried to move this, absolutely nothing would happen. And there's, as you can see here, there's not a lot to grab onto without damaging it potentially. This would be a bad place to grab onto. You definitely don't want to grab over here. There's a lot of intricate little trinkets. There's not a lot to do. One of the things you could do, you could put the screws back in a little bit and use them to tap on, and maybe the chassis will pop up. So originally I tried to push and shove and poke around on there. And I ended up taking a pocket knife and kind of carefully running it under here until one side got loose. And then it started to come loose. And I poked around and poked around and poked around. Eventually I got it loose, and you can kind of... And it's managed to weld itself back together again. That's interesting. So I guess I'm going to get to do this all over again. And the first thing I need to do is figure out how to do this on camera. And well, I tell you what, I got to shut you off because I'm getting interrupted. You'll be back. I'll be back. Okie dokie. So it's about an hour, rough, give or take a little bit, later, and I've totally lost my train of thought. I was trying to take this out. So, I was having trouble. One of the things that might make your life a little easier is this little cup here is held in normally with 3 screws. This one apparently is missing some screws. So you remove the screws. These are just kind of like little sheet metal screws. I believe originally these might have been kind of like wood screws. Anytime you take anything off of this material, you might want to think about it real carefully and be careful. It may be, yeah, see there's an original screw there. And it's black, so you can't see it. It's a Phillips that's a little baby, kind of a little wood screw, and we're missing one, and then that cup will come off. So somebody bodged a screw in there, and I don't know how you, I guess somebody took this apart and lost the screws. I don't know, I don't think they just normally come off. That makes that a little bit easier. Where is this stuck? Last time this was actually stuck on the face of the speaker. And where that's hung up at. I know that there is not another screw. A putty knife would work really well for this. Oh, I remember. this unit had a bracket up underneath. And there's the screw. If something is stuck, or you don't know why it doesn't come out, it pays to look around. Don't get to yanking on things, or you'll bend something or break something or destroy something, you'll be sorry. Okay. Now's a good time to be really careful of this area. There's actually a lot of potential pitfalls here, and you can get into trouble kind of quickly. And there's still something kind of hanging this baby up a little bit. And I don't know what that is. There's a bracket there. Oh, that's what the deal is. Okay. Remember that. Over here in the corner, wherever I'm at, not that corner, this corner, right there. There's a dial light, I forgot about that. And that just comes loose. You kind of flip that up out of the way. This particular dial light looks like it's been replaced, I believe. It's just a little screw-in light. This actually looks like a... Yep, that's what I thought. And I don't think that's right. This is actually a pin light because it has this little lens. This is actually a little magnifying lens. And this is a number 22. There. This is a number 222 light. This is actually the same light bulb you use in an older Weller soldering gun. And I think those are like 2 volts each. I'll have to look that up. Okie dokie. So we managed to get the chassis out of the cabinet. And I'm just going to screw that back in. And actually that wire's got a little tiny... Well, it isn't a break. Okay, now's the time you look around in here and see what there is to see. Oh. And for me, I used to use a flashlight and kind of look around. And there is a lot of dirt in here. And you can dust that all out. There's the dial light switch right over here. Kind of treat that a little bit gingerly. There are a number of different ways to clean this out. Now's the time. Over here on the other side is a little paper label, and it's not in the greatest shape. This had the layout of the tubes, some probably mostly patent information, some other things. There was something else. Okay. I bet $1 that was like that. There's some staples there that held the dial light up, and they've gotten torn. Whether they were torn before or I just tore them, I don't know. This radio has been in and out of this chassis has been in and out of this cabinet a few times, and how I know that is right there. You can see this little mark where somebody's been. This is kind of stained black, and you can see where it's been drug out of there a few times. And like most radios, the crummier wood is on the inside. That practice has been pretty common. I remember the first time I ran into that. It's another little side trip. I worked on a Atwater Kent, I think it was a Model 20. It's what they call a TRF, tuned radio frequency. It has a number of tubes and number of tuning stages. It's not like a super heterodyne. Most modern radios are what they call super heterodyne. And the case on it was just pulverized. It was a wood case, so I was measuring it to reproduce it. And when I got to the bottom, and I think the back, I know for sure it was the bottom. The case itself on that radio was at one time pretty nice. It was mahogany. The bottom was pine. And I thought, well, really? This is a... I guess I had in my mind that old radios were a work of art and a thing of beauty. No, they weren't. They were pieces of production. They were mass produced. Anything to save a buck. So the bottom was pine. So that tradition carries on and on and on and on. Hence one of my beefs about the mechanical world, or the world in general. So I don't know, you take your paintbrush and kind of go over it. Okay, so you've got the radio away from the chassis, or the chassis away from the case. You can go a couple different directions. You can go work on the case, or you can go work on the radio. Or you can go have something to drink. Well, what should we do here? Well, in my shop, I am not terribly case orientated. I never have been, and I leave that up to other folks. I know plenty of other folks that are better at that. Doesn't mean I don't do it. It means I choose not to. What's that old saying? A man has to know his limitations. There are people that are more efficient at it than I am because they do it more often. And that's fine. But this case is in pretty good shape, and I don't think I'm going to tinker with it. I don't know. Don't really care for rebuilding old radios completely. I mean, this is how it looked after 60 years. Sometimes they look really great. Sometimes they're kind of pulverized pieces of junk. I've made a fair practice out of rescuing old radios. And, oh, hang on. Yeah, oh, let me stop you again. Okie dokie, we're back after about another hour. Let's see, what was I talking about? Oh, how do I want to put this? One of my, I don't know, I guess it's a hobby, or it's a practice. There we go, that's better. One of my practices is, I about won't turn down any... That's interesting. Gee, what a surprise. I'll be back. We're back. And gee, there's another 45 minutes out of my life. Okay. Let me think. I've made a fair practice over the years out of rescuing old radios that the cases were pretty much demolished on them. And the reason I do that is a couple reasons. One of two things happens. I get the radio and the case is usually junk. And I'll fix the radio, the guts up. And sometimes I'll try and fix the case or do some restoration on it. And it can be quite a time gobbler. It's very tough to do, for me anyway, because I'm too picky. It's kind of like when you paint your house. I don't know, houses in general. Let me give you my theory of houses in general. If you want to run away, feel free. When you build a house, houses are a series of mistakes that cover each other up. You start with the foundation, and then you cover that up, and you build the frame. You cover that up. You get the drywall, you cover that up. And basically the last mistake you make is, probably painting. And anytime you do that stuff, you usually, at least for me, I criticize my own little imperfections or mistakes. I would be a horrible body person because I would spend years, measuring and pounding and tapping probably a square inch before I got it the way I thought it would be. So anyway, I take way too long to work on wood, and then I see the mistakes and I kind of beat myself up. So I've smartened up over the years, and I usually don't tinker with the cases so much. I have some friends that do woodwork and love doing that. So that's what happens that way. The other thing that can happen too is I'll fix the radio's guts up and you put it up for sale or trade it to somebody else who has a case that's in good shape. And basically they use it like a core and they just yank the guts out and send them back to me or throw them away or do whatever they're going to do with them, and then they've got, you know, the best of both worlds there. Or a practice I picked up probably, I don't know, 10 years ago is I fix these up and I take them to, I go to flea markets and stuff, and I'll take a picture of what the case should look like and some dimensions, and sometimes I'll take the old case with. And I get people to buy these up. They buy them so they can build their own cases or their own radios. They're woodworkers and they don't have any interest in the guts or the skill, but they would be more than happy to build, you know, I've got a number of guys that have built console radios out of little radios like this, and it's kind of funny. It's kind of cool. Some of them are very cool. I need to go over there and see George and see what he's built lately. He builds tombstone radios. I kind of keep on the prowl for decent little radios that look kind of the way he wants them to, and then he builds little tombstone recreations of like Zeniths and stuff, of Atwater Kents and stuff. And they're pretty cool. They're more modern guts, but I don't know. And you know, he sells them once in a while, or people buy them from him. They're buying the case. They're not buying the radios so much. And it's kind of like building your own car from some other car, I guess, is the closest analogy I can think. Okay. So we talked about this radio a little bit, and there's no reason to go over too much of the stuff that I did. I tested the tubes. I originally tried to fire this radio up carefully, and nothing happened. And I usually, when I fire a new radio up, I usually use a Variac. Although you can use the what's called the dim bulb tester, and I've got a brand new video that'll go up. I don't know. It'll go up here pretty soon. Of how to build a dim bulb tester and how to use it, real roughly. One of the, I don't know, it isn't a bad thing. One of the maybe difficult or annoying things about YouTube is I personally find this very impersonal. I'm just talking at you. You know, normally when you have a conversation with somebody, you interact and they stop you and or you know, well, I have a question about something. So these are very one-sided. They're very interesting. Like when they have documentaries or, you know, how-tos, you know, usually you probably write a script and you try and answer a number of questions. Well, no matter what questions you try and answer or cover, there's always some other questions. So it's probably like being president. No matter what you do, it's wrong. There's about a thankless job. So originally I took, and let's just go over this real briefly, I took all the tubes out and tested them. I worked on some of the mechanics of this radio. I worked on this cord winder a little bit. I found a tube in the wrong socket. This tuning mechanism was all froze up. This is ground I've covered, sorry. And I kind of got the thing going again. One of the things I didn't show you was this mechanism over here. This is what they call a tuning, I call it the tuning tower. This is how the shortwave of the Transoceanic works. And this is kind of a piece of art. Not one of the great pieces of art. That's interesting, I didn't notice that. Huh. Okay. That's weird. It's like a loose screw. Buried inside here, and I really can't show you all of it, is there's a mechanism that when you push this in, releases this bar and lets the other band selectors eject. Let me see here. We need the magic wand. Where did that go? Haha, have you now. The magic wand being the little pointy chopstick here. On this particular Transoceanic, this switch assembly is sandwiched on there, so it's kind of interesting. There's a number of bars, there's a number of little coils that stand up here. This thing is a sort of a disaster waiting to happen, meaning you're going to snag the, your sleeve or something on this. So be a little careful. There's actually two sets of switches here. There's a phenolic, kind of a slab from, let's see here. Yeah. From here to here to here to here. That's all a big slab of switches. There are these little coils here. Some of them are the oscillator coils, some of them are the RF tuning coils. There's some other stuff buried in there, and there are a number of little switches in here. And about 90% of the troubles I see with Transoceanics lurk in here. They have their normal old radio problems, but this is a real sore spot. I've got I believe I mentioned that in the other video, I've got a huge stack of these that they're totaled because of this. And I don't know, I've been using them as a boneyard to get other Transoceanics going. So when you deal with this, you kind of treat it kind of gingerly. Oh, I'm trying to think. We didn't talk too much about the bottom. You know, depending on what's wrong with the radio, you may have to do some tinkering. And you may have to use your brain. If you're, well, one of the next things you got to really do is get a schematic and then try and determine what's wrong with the radio. On this one, what was the deal? Well, there was actually a couple tubes in the wrong places. I had to fix that first. And there was trouble with that cord winder. It actually wouldn't pass AC. I had to take it apart. There were a number of annoying little things, and I kind of talked about that in the other video. Like I said, we're reaching controversial territory here. A lot of guys like to replace those caps and go to town there. And sometimes that's a good deal, and sometimes it's bad. I personally think that's you do what you think is best for you kind of territory. Since all these chassis are different, it's sort of hard to talk about them in a group, but I don't know, you can try. The other thing that's a little bit unusual about these is, like I mentioned in the other video, is that these tubes are battery operated tubes, so they just have a filament. They don't have a cathode. So it makes the radio's design a little bit different. So you may have to get out your schematic and study. For the most part, this radio is now, you didn't see this originally, but now repaired. And we're ready to go back in its container. Like a lot of things in life, sometimes I don't kick the camera too much. This faceplate could use a nice cleaning. Just go to town. You can assemble or disassemble this as much as you want. Right here is me pointing at something again. And this here, it was actually stuck on the face of the case. It's kind of a foam and it's turned into a rock. It was probably to keep the this from rattling, if I had to guess. but it was kind of welded. I don't know if you can see that right along in there. It was sort of welded to the face, and that's what kept this radio from coming out. I didn't know that at the time. Basically on the radio, I always kind of divide the problems into two categories, mechanical and electrical. Most of the time, there are more mechanical issues than electrical. If you get those all fixed up, you can choose what you want to do. Do you want to, if you get the thing up and running, I usually let the radios run a few days. I have a place in my shop. It's basically a little shelf that I set a number of radios at a time, and they sit and percolate away, and I can pull them out and look at them and see how they're doing. I've always got a number of projects going at once. That makes this YouTube thing, it makes it tougher, and but that's how I run my shop, so no good deed goes unpunished, so you get to do what you got to do. Now, you may need to work on some other things. There's a number of other things that can come up that aren't apparent or available here. I mean, your speaker might be tore or damaged, you might have to deal with that. The cord winder could be broken, you might have to deal with that. Sometimes you may not, you may have a part that's broke, that's a part that isn't replaceable. So you're going to have to make some decision about what needs to happen. Do you give up? Do you bodge around it? Do you try and remanufacture it? Do you try and find a replacement? That's a choice that you'll have to make depending on what it is. I don't know, let's see, the cord winder was broke on this. There's nothing to stop you from you could rewire the cord and bring it out and tuck it in the chassis and just kind of have that for a rainy day. Do you want to fix the battery circuit in these? I very seldom do, to be really honest. I don't ever run these on batteries. It just doesn't come up. I've ran them before, but I don't know. It's just one of those things. Do you have a tube that's kind of weak, but still runs? Do you replace all that? It's like restoring a car. It really is. You have to work on. If you're going to restore a car, you probably have dedicated time. One of my friends he restores old cars. And I asked him one time how he did that, and he said, it's a job. I go out and work on it every day. Is rain or shine, whether he's sick. And I know one time he was pretty sick, and I went over there to see if he needed anything, and he's out there working on his car. I'm like yelling at him. I said, you got to be kidding me. You're sick as a dog, and you're out here tinkering with this car. Well, I got to work on it. It'll never get done. I said, no, you need to rest for a day. Everybody gets a rest. Okie dokie. Well, I'll tell you what. So, let's say this is all fixed up. One of the other things, well, let me stop here a second. Let's talk about an area of controversy on this particular radio is, and a lot of radios that have punch buttons, is spraying it with contact cleaner. Think about that very carefully before you willy-nilly go spraying in there, under a few reasons. One is you're going to get that stuff on everything here, and it might eat into some of the wiring. And today's contact cleaners, some of them can be a little grumpy. If you're going to use contact cleaner, read the can really super carefully, and I would suggest that you buy 2 cans of it, and I would suggest that you, if you're unfamiliar with it, that you play with it first. Spray some other things before you go spraying something that could turn into a valuable piece of equipment. That's one of the other things that I would strongly suggest. If at any time you get in over your head, feel free to stop and seek some expertise. I mentioned before that there are some forums that have hundreds of members that tinker with antique radios specifically. And some of the areas they may be better served at than I am. That doesn't mean I don't want to help people. It means that you might get better advice, or you might get more expedient advice than I could give. Another tiny little side trip. Here's a time where I have to think about how long I've gib-gabbed, and how do I break this up. Do I leave it as one big chunk, which some of my viewers like? Do I break it up into a lot of little chunks, which seems to be what the majority of YouTube is about? It's kind of what I call lovingly short attention span theater, which is fine. People are busy. So what do you do there? So we try and head back. So be careful with the contact cleaner. Apart from it being expensive, it can be sort of caustic. And if you're going to get some real contact cleaner. Don't use brake cleaner and some of the other things that are floating around. You can use that stuff, just know what it's going to do. It's probably going to, on something like this, it probably would disintegrate it. So who knows what might happen. Working on old electronics can be quite intense. There's 1,000 things to clean and poke at and look at and make decisions about. So let's say we're done with all this. And it's time to slide it back in the chassis. Hopefully you've kept all your screws. Trying to find a way to pick it up without being such a brute. And trying to figure out how to get the wiring that's in there out of the way. That actually worked pretty good. I just tucked that bulb up into the top there. So let's slide this back in real careful. Yeah, let me show you that real quick. There. See all that black stuff there? That's all that speaker kind of foam that was stuck there. It kept that from coming out of the chassis. Now this will be a little interesting because it's got this loose jack. So I'm going to set the radio in there real carefully. It's not doing very good. What is keeping that in there? There we go. And already jacked up here. Trying to get that wiring back. And there's another interruption. Gee, what a surprise. Despite what it looks like, I have a number of little things I have to do during the day, so I'll be back.